Doug Cobb, welcome to the program. I don't know when I first heard about the finishing fund, but it's been at least a few years. And I know you guys were founded in 2017. Do I have that correct?
That's correct. Late in the year in 2017. Warren, it's great to be with you Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And so, why don't I want to talk about the whole arc of what you are doing and plan to do, of course. But why don't we start with sort of the origin
Hmm.
story of the finishing fund? Because, as I said, you haven't been around forever. You're not one of those missions groups that were founded in the 19th century.
Right.
This organization, what you do is relatively recent and born out of a sense of urgency about the Great Commission. Can you say more
Yes.
about that?
Yeah, I was privileged to get connected to Paul Eshelman back in the day. He really became my mentor. He was running Finishing the Task, got me involved with that organization. Finishing the Task is a network of ministries globally that, have a vision of seeing the Great Commission finished in this generation. For Paul, the first among equals of those Great Commission tasks were the unengaged people groups, the several thousand groups originally that nobody had ever been to tell them about Jesus. And I caught that vision from him. And, as my thinking evolved around that, Jean and I, my wife and I, began to give toward projects that would engage unengaged groups. We did that in Nepal and Nigeria, in India, and then, got to experience this amazing thing of seeing the first known believers in the history of the world from people groups that we had helped fund their engagement. It's just incredible. It's like something out of the book of Acts, seeing the gospel going into these dark places. And um, I didn't know that God had been preparing me throughout my whole career in startups and venture capital and angel capital to launch what effectively is like a venture capital fund for the Great Commission. We are not an executing ministry. We don't have any missionaries on our team. We don't send anybody, but we raise support from donors who want to be investing their kingdom dollars at the frontier of the Great Commission. And then we pool those dollars and put them to work in with ministries and projects that will take the gospel for the first time to a people group that nobody has ever been to tell them about Jesus. And so, like, I feel like I've got the best job in the world. We're working at the dead frontier. I mean, at the very front line of the Great Commission, and seeing God do amazing things in those places.
Well, Doug, I want to hit the pause button on a couple of because you've said about five things that I want to clarify. The First of all, you mentioned Paul Eshelman and finishing the task,
Yeah.
and I just want you to kind of clear up a little possible confusion. You guys are the finishing fund,
Yes.
finishing the task. I've sometimes confused the two of those, and I think because Paul Eshelman was, involved in your story and also
Right.
involved in the finishing the task. Talk. Do y'all work together? Y'all are completely separate organizations. I think Rick Warren has been involved in the Finishing the Task project. Is that accurate?
Yes, we created the finishing fund as an adjunct, but completely legally separate from FTT, from finishing the task. And frankly, I'm kind of glad we did that because finishing the task went through some struggles, during COVID and during the transition of leadership to from Paul to Rick, and we were able to, maintain our momentum straight through. I would say though that we are in a sense birthed out of finishing the task, and the list that we work from of the unengaged groups is the list that Paul in finishing the task pioneered back in the early 2000s. So close connection, very missionally aligned, but organizationally independent.
And I want to drill down a little bit on that venture capital phrase as
Metaphor.
well,
Yeah. Yeah.
because in the secular world, in the for-profit world, venture capitalists make often early stage investments in a
Hmm.
company. They don't
Hmm.
provide all the money. In fact,
Hmm.
they expect the organization to use that money and grow. In fact, I've sometimes jokingly heard venture capital as being like you give somebody a ball of twine and a bed sheet and you throw them out of airplane and you expect them to turn it into a parachute before they hit the ground. That's kind of what venture capital is. They get you started, but they hope that that you take that little bit of money and turn it into something much, much bigger.
Yes.
And your the finishing fund is since you use that analogy, let me kind of lean into that a little bit. The finishing fund is not huge. I mean, when you started,
Oh,
you were obviously zero. I think now you're maybe $3 to $4 million a year in annual revenue. Is that
a little
close to
bit
that?
more than that, 4 to 5 maybe, but yeah,
Okay,
you're roughly
but
right. Yeah.
but clearly, if your goal is to evangelize the entire world, $5 million is not enough to do it.
No.
So what's your strategy? How do you use that $5 million in a way that gives you the kind of leverage, or if I could use venture capital language, ROI, return on
Yeah.
investment, that a venture capitalist would
Yeah.
expect?
That's a great question, Warren. You know, of the projects that we've supported in the history of the Finishing Fund, now 800 some, engagements, all but one or two have been done using national missionaries. So we don't send Westerners to these people groups around the world. We send nationals. We send Indians who know Jesus to Indian people groups that don't, and Laotians to Laotians, and so forth. And because of that, the economics of the projects we undertake are really pretty staggeringly good. We began with the assumption that we could send two missionaries for 3 years for a total of about $30,000 to a people group. And that varies some from part of the world to part of the world. It's more expensive in Brazil. It tends to be less expensive in India. But it's been a pretty good benchmark. So, just $30,000 can launch a 3 year engagement project for a people group. And so, when you think about it in $30,000 increments, three, four, $5 million a year can go quite a long way. Another thing that helps us with this is we're not trying to do the whole Great Commission. There are great people working on Bible translation. We don't really do any of that. We don't do a lot of great, work that people are doing around the world. We really focus on originally one and now really two things. We only do projects to engage unengaged people groups. And so if you're doing something else, we say, God bless you. We're really glad you're doing that, but it's not a fit for us. And uh, that helps a lot with strategic focus to be able to say yes to the right things and no to the things that don't fit. So, God has been lavish in His support for us. We've always had enough to do the things that He's brought to us, and that continues to be my prayer. That Father, would you just give us enough to do what you want us to do? And we've been able to make impact by being very focused in the things we take on.
Leaning into that venture capital metaphor just a bit more, Doug, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your portfolio, if I could put it that way. Venture capitalists talk about portfolio companies,
Right.
companies that made investments in. I looked at y'all's Form 990 before we spoke, and I see on the most recent Form 990, probably about 25, 26, 27, something like that, organizations
Yeah.
that y'all had made investments in. And I'm just going to mention a couple of them.
Okay.
Africa Inland Mission,
Yep.
you gave $44,000 to that organization. Deaf Pathway Global,
Hmm.
you gave $47,000 to that organization. And by the way, I think a lot of people don't realize that the deaf community, the deaf
Yes.
population, is one of the largest unreached people groups in the world.
Yes.
Which so I was really interested to see that. And I'm not going to go down the list, but
Yeah.
26 or 27. The largest grant that I see on this list was, it looks like, about $350,000 in round numbers. Most of them are less than $100,000.
Yes.
And so a couple of questions about that. I first of all, I see evidence of what you just said, that it doesn't take a lot of money to make a big difference with some of these smaller organizations.
Yes.
But number two, I'm guessing that if you gave away 25 grants, and I'm rounding the numbers, you probably got requests for 10 times that many, or at least more than 20, some number more than 25.
Yes.
So how do you vet an organization, especially once the word gets out that, hey, Doug Cobb's got money,
Yeah,
the finishing fund's got cash?
right.
What does that process look like, and how do y'all really stay focused on what you are trying to do?
Yeah, the most important aspect of that is simply the thing I said before, which is, we're just only going to fund this one kind of project, right? We can talk more later that we're beginning a second focus of church planting in unengaged places, not a people group strategy, but a geographical strategy. But for the original mission of the fund, it was just unengaged people groups. And so it helped a lot to be able to say no thank you to proposals that we would get for good things that didn't, touch that specific strategy. But then, of course, we do all the things you would expect in doing due diligence for a new ministry partner. We look at their 990s, we ask who their board is, we ask for their experience in doing this kind of work, who they are, what they know how to do. And we collect all of that information. And, sometimes we find that there's a disqualifier in there, not very often. I think the most important due diligence principle is biblical. Our master told us, he who is faithful in little will be faithful in much. And so, we learned early on that the best way to get to know a new ministry is to do something with them. So if they pass through the grid of yes, we have a heart for the unengaged, we want to go get this group. Yes, the legal stuff's all in place, the financial stuff is acceptable. Then our approach would be, okay, let's do something small together and see how it goes. And if we can do a one group project, $30,000, and it goes great, well, then bring us more. Probably our top ministry partner, certainly one of the top ones, is a great ministry, New Covenant Missions. They've done engagement with us all across Africa, from Senegal all the way to Somalia, and we started with them with, I think, a project with a couple of people groups, and have done, I think, now almost 20 projects that touched maybe close to 60 people groups across Africa. Because they've just every time been faithful to do what we ask them to do, or to tell us, look, we're running into problems. We can't do it. We're going to have to try something different. So really what we've tried to do is build relationships with ministries that prove that they'll do what they commit to do.
Yeah. Doug, doing a little back of the envelope math here. You did 5 million this year. I had some old data, so you did maybe 4 million the year before, whatever. But
Yep.
I mean, obviously you started at zero back in 2017. But again, quick back of the envelope math. I'm guessing you guys over the years have maybe deployed as much as $20 million.
Yep, that's about
Um,
right.
and and if there are 25 on just this one Form 990,
Mhm.
maybe some of these organizations are the same ones that show up year after year, based on what you said, but probably a lot newer. So, I mean, what's the total number of organizations that you funded over the years? 50, 75, 100?
Yeah, it's in the 40s, the mid 40s, about 45 or 46. Many of them we've done multiple projects with. A few of them we won't do additional work with for one reason or another. So, and a few we have found to be just excellent, and so we try to find ways to do more and more with those. It's like everything else in life, there's a big middle and a few at the bottom that aren't great, and a few at the top that are excellent, and we try to double down on those.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because you mentioned a little about how you maybe would initiate a relationship with a ministry. You'd start small,
Yes.
you would do your due diligence in advance, and then you'd see how they perform. Well, how do you evaluate how they perform? Do you get on an airplane and go to Africa or go to Asia, or do you uh, have people on the ground in different parts of the world that would do that for you? Talk a little about how you can be sure that an organization is actually doing what it says it's doing, because by the nature of your work, these are
Yeah.
areas that are not easy to get to.
Yeah. I'll start by saying that it's a difficult thing. If somebody wanted intentionally to deceive you, it would be difficult to sniff that out because, like you say, These things happen in very remote places, in places where they don't speak English. And, if somebody was intent on defrauding you, it would be hard to sniff that out. But yes, all of the above. We do travel to these places. I've been to some pretty exciting places in this job. I have a trip coming up in later in the winter to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. It's part of the job. It's not necessarily my favorite part, but it's part of what we do. We go and see. We've learned over the years, there's a couple of interesting sort of phenomena. Sometimes the ministries don't believe us when we tell them this, but one thing that really bolsters our confidence in the ministry is when they tell us about the problems they're having with the projects that are underway. Um, all of us have been around enough to know that nothing goes the way you plan it, right? Everything is harder than it looks. There's unexpected things that come up. And when ministries are just straightforward in saying, look, we've really hit a rock here. We're going to drop back and try something different. Man, that bolsters our confidence so much that when they tell us something good that happened, that, it's going to be the case too. Another thing is just their willingness to, reveal to us what they're doing. If I jokingly say that if I call up a ministry leader and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about maybe in, 90 days, I'd like to come visit the work in this place." If they say, "Oh, that's just awesome. I can't wait to see you. Well, be great." I can almost say, "Nah, never mind. I don't need to come." If they say, "Oh, I don't know, that's going to be really difficult," and I'm like, "Well, I'm coming next week," right? Because just
Right.
just the openness to to the visit is a good sign of of trustworthiness. And so we feel like we've made some mistakes in this regard. It's inevitable. Before I was a kingdom venture capitalist, I was a secular venture capitalist, and I'd like to say that I picked perfect, companies every time to invest in. I did not. Some of them proved to be very bad mistakes. I don't think that's possible to avoid that when you're working in, kind of high risk work like we do. For the most part, I think we've done it, really well, and you live and learn on those things.
Yep. Doug, one of the things that I really like about the finishing fund is just how transparent you are. I mean, in our rating system, you get a give with confidence score, you get an A transparency grade. I mean, there's just a lot to like about y'all's ratings, and we grade pretty hard. I mean, if you compare MinistryWatch to Charity Navigator, for example, or even Excellence in Giving,
Mhm.
which I think is a really great organization, and I know the folks there. We're harder than they are. Let's just put it that way. And but you guys still rise to the top. And you're operating, as you've already mentioned, in some pretty you said exciting areas. I
Yeah.
would translate that to be gnarly,
Gnarly,
challenging
dangerous. Yeah.
areas. And a lot of organizations that I won't say a lot, but there are some organizations that we talk with. They're reluctant to share information with us because they say there are security
Mhm.
issues involved. And I don't doubt that there are a lot of godly, faithful people living sacrificially in harm's way around the world. But it seems to me that even if that's true, that the organization back here in the United States shouldn't be reluctant to share financial information with donors here in the
Yeah.
United States. You seem to also have adopted that same philosophy. Can you say more about that? Especially speaking to donors, if a donor listening to us is thinking about giving to an organization that says we're not going to give, I mean, to an organization that says we're not going to share with you what we're doing because of security issues, is that
Yeah.
a valid concern?
It is a valid concern, but I think there's ways to address it. The work is dangerous in many of these frontier places, whether it's in, the Hindu world or the Muslim world. There are real forces of opposition, and there's real danger for the missionaries and the new converts. One of the things that we intentionally did with the finishing fund at the beginning is that we, intended it to be a major donor only ministry. We ask our partners, which what we call our donors, to commit at least $30,000 to us. Many of them fulfill that 10,000 a year over 3 years, which works great for us. And so, our total donor base is less than it, right at 300 people, a little less than 300. And so, um, it's a small club, and we can be very confident about sharing information with them. It's not going out to the whole universe. We don't post these things on social media. We use closed communications, and I think we've educated our donors pretty well. Hey, don't take this and put it up, on your social media feed. This is too dangerous. So I think we're able to navigate that because of the structure of the ministry. When I tell these stories in more public places, like in my new book or when I do it in a church setting, I'll just change the name of the people group. I'll change I won't say the country. I'll just describe the region. And that seems to be sufficient to protect the people who are working in those places. We don't want to get anybody harmed, but we also want to be able to tell the stories. And so we think there's ways to accomplish both of those things.
Doug, to kind of help us land this plane, and since you mentioned your new book, tell us about that book. What are you trying to communicate with that book, and sort of why did you want to write it in the first place?
Yeah, the book is titled "The Sprint to the Finish: The Global Push to Complete the Great Commission in This Generation." I wrote the book because, it just breaks my heart that so few Christians, our brothers and sisters, even know what the Great Commission is, much less these astounding things that God is doing around the world to bring it to a completion. I would guess that, very few Christians have any idea that it's possible by God's grace that, we could see the Great Commission finish lines crossed in the next few years. We think we're down now well under 100 people groups that are unengaged. We're hopeful that in the next year or two we'll see that crossed. We believe that the Bible translation work is proceeding at a great pace, and that they're going to make their deadline of 2033 for every language. And so nobody knows about this stuff, Warren. It's tragic. We're living in the generation that's by God's grace going to see the finish of this race, and people are unaware. And so I wrote this book to try to give people a sort of beginning to end view of the Great Commission. It gives a good look at the biblical foundations of the Great Commission. It talks about the three finish lines: every nation, every language, every place. Talks about media and technology, the great coming, the diaspora of the unreached world. And I hope that somebody who's read it will really, be able to say, okay, now I understand this. And significantly, I want to find my lane in this race. I want to figure out what God's calling on me is to be a part of this. So, yeah, that's the reason I wrote it. And, I hope people will pick it up and learn about these amazing things that God is doing.
Doug, when I conclude an interview with someone like you, somebody, we with whom we've talked about a lot of things and important things, I often ask this question in closing: Is there anything I just wasn't smart enough to ask, or in the midst of all the things that we did talk about, is there one that you want to make sure sticks with us, that doesn't get lost in all of the important stuff that we talked about?
Yeah, I'd probably go back to what I just said. I believe that our generation has a great opportunity. Often you hear people say, "Well, I wish I'd been alive in the first century. Could have, seen the Apostle Paul and all this, and that would have been awesome. I mean, it certainly would have been a great thing. But if you could witness any part of a race, after the start, what would you choose most to see? You'd choose to see, everybody would choose to see the finish. That's where the action is, right? And we are the generation that is, living in the season of the finish of the Great Commission. I just would encourage folks to take the time to learn about this and to find their role, whether it's praying or giving or maybe going. God has a role for each of us in this race. We don't want to get to heaven and say, "Oh, really? I missed all of that. How did I not know that was happening all around me, in this time?" So I would just say, to folks, take the time to learn about what God is doing and find a way to get involved in it.
That's a great word to close on, Doug. Thank you so much for being on the program today. Grateful for your time and also grateful for your work and the work of the Finishing Fund.
Likewise,
Blessings.
Warren, thank you so much for having me on.